Another way for us to work with promises would be using the keywords async and await. The idea here is that they would simplify some scenarios where we need to work with a lot of promises. And if I need to create a new promise, I would simply need to include the keyword async in front of a function that I am creating. That will automatically generate a promise, and therefore that function will return a promise where I could have the methods then and catch. Or another way for me to consume a promise would be using the keyword await. Instead of using callback functions for the methods then and catch, I would simply use the keyword await, and that would take care of the then method inside my promise. Let's make an example. Let's go back to the code. Right now we have the standard way that we use with promises. I have this function that will return a promise. Therefore, we have the callback function for the then method in case it is successful. And also I have the catch method calling a callback function whenever there is an error. And we have this log message once it's done. Let's say I want to work using the keywords await and async. Again, the idea would be to simplify, but this scenario is so simple that it would just make it more confusing. But nevertheless, let's take a look how it would work with await and async. First, instead of calling the function and then appending callback functions to that, I would use just the call for this function. Let me just comment out this code, and let's include the result as we have done before. So I expect to receive a result, and then let's just log that result to see what we get. We have done this before. We know that what we are going to get back is just the promise itself saying that it is pending. However, if I simply include here the keyword await, then I would take care this callback function for the then method. What the await is going to do, it is going to await for the fetch method, and then whenever I have a result which would be called inside this method, then it would just be associating to this variable. So what I have here in this line is exactly what I have here inside this then method. And then I can log the result as I do here. That would be simpler, however, it's not going to work because one of the requirements for me to use await is that it must be inside a async function. So the first thing that I need to do is create this asynchronous function. Let me start by creating a function, let's say getData. And then for this function, I'm going to include this code inside, and then I can call this function getData. But as you can see, I already have an error here, and the error is the same as we had before. It must be inside a async function. So what it's missing here is that for this function, I need to include the keyword async, which means getData now returns a promise, which means it will wait for this one to be executed. If I save, you can see I call my function getData, and I still get logged the next line, which is done. Because this is asynchronous, it will be executing while everything else is continuing inside my producing code. Once I get inside here, I call result, which will be awaiting for the fetch to get the data. Once it gets, it will put the data inside this result variable, which I get here on line 8, and I am logging that information here. So this is a different way for me to work with a promise instead of creating this then method. Again, it seems more complicated because in this scenario I am creating this extra function, but in some scenarios I will have the function already there, the function will be already asynchronous, so I would just need to include this line. But what about catch? We have taken care of the then method, but what about .catch? For handling errors whenever we are using the await and async keywords, we need to use the try-catch block from JavaScript. This is just some basic JavaScript features. So if I go back to my code, all I need to do is include, let's put in below here a block for try and catch, this block will automatically try to execute whatever code I put inside this try block. So let me move this code inside here. It's going to try to execute this code. If that's successful, I get the result and I log the result. However, if something goes wrong, this block will trigger this catch where I will receive the error and then I could simply log this error inside this line. Or I could do whatever I need with this error message. So if I save now, you can see everything works. So I am logging the result from line 10, which is this one. But if something goes wrong, let's say I put a wrong address, let's say fake. If I save, you can see that now it failed, and I am calling the error log from line 13, which is the one that I have right here. So this one will take care of this catch block where I am logging whatever information I have about the error. And this is a different way. Again, in this example, it would be simpler. I have less code creating this way than I had on this other example. But as my application grows, sometimes it's going to be better to use await and async to work with promise. Bottom line, it is important for you to know both methods because sometimes it's going to be easier to use this method and sometimes it's going to be easier to use this other approach. As long as you know both of them, you're going to have different ways of working with your code.